Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Richard Smith. Richard is the co-founder and head of sales at Refract. Refract is a platform that records and analyzes your sales conversations, and everything that Richard and I just talked about in my conversation is all about helping you and your sales teams improve your sales conversations. I think you're really going to like this episode. We got into the weeds deep with some really specific tactical tips on how you can drastically improve your sales conversations each and every day. So here are just a couple of the topics that we talked about. First of all, Richard talked about the importance of a meaningful conversation and a conversation where the customer feels there was a positive experience. We talked about the definitions around that meaningful experience and how important it is in the discovery part of your conversations to focus on that discovery call as where your sales are won or lost. From there, we talked about what are some leading indicators, what makes for a good sales conversation. And we went through 4 or 5 really specific places where you can treat these almost like a checklist, that if you listen to your own sales conversations that you might be recording on Zoom or WebEx or any other platform, even if you're not using a platform like Refract, you can go listen to your own sales conversations or pair up with a buddy of yours and say, listen, I'm going to listen to yours, you listen to mine. Here are 4 or 5 things I want you to listen for. Do I check the box for each of those? And if you don't check the box, then you probably didn't have as good of a sales conversations as you think you did. And specifically, you'll be able to find find where and how you can improve those sales conversations. We talked about the need for approval that salespeople have and that we all have as human beings, and how that works against us in the sale and in our sales conversations. And most importantly, we talked about how do we create an environment where we can ask tough questions, because too often, as Richard and I talked about, too often as salespeople, we're a little bit scared because of this need for approval. We're a little bit worried about what's going to happen if we ask a tough question to a prospect that we don't want to piss off, that we don't want to annoy, that we don't want to seem like we're going too far or getting too personal. And Richard shared with us a very specific tactical tip on how you can set your prospects up to ask those tough questions in a way that allows you to lower the resistance in the sale. We talked about how to use the simplest questions in your sales process, in your discovery calls, and the danger of looking at any sales opportunity and asking and telling yourself, I think they're going to buy because, and this phrase, I think, and how that interpretation and bias that we have as salespeople can negatively influence our ability to really find a key problem and to find what he calls a compelling reason for our prospects to buy. We covered a ton of ground. We got really tactical, lots of examples, lots of very specific tips, giving you a really great framework for analyzing your own sales conversations and how you can improve and make your own sales conversations better. So really glad that we had Richard here on the show. One thing I wanted to mention to you, if you didn't already know this, I wrote a book pretty recently. It's called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. And one of the things I'd love to do is make sure you get a copy of this book. And the easiest way to do that is to go over to my website, SalesQualia, Qualia.com. And right there on the homepage, there's a big black banner ad that says, start reading now. Just go ahead and click that. You can download a PDF of the book. It's an entire copy of the book. I want to get the word out, the message out to as many people as possible, including you. So if you haven't downloaded a copy of the book, please go over to the website, grab a copy of the book. I'm very sure that you'll be glad that you did. We're getting tons of great reviews, tons of positive feedback. I'm getting text messages from people that are reading it, telling me that how much they're enjoying the book and how much they're learning from it. So I would love to add you to the list of people that we're helping with this book. So head over to salesqualia.com. Grab a copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, and let's head over to my conversation with Richard Smith. Richard, welcome to the Startup Selling Show. How are you today?
I'm pretty good, Scott. It's good to represent this side of the Atlantic Ocean. So
the whole other side of the pond, as they say, right?
That's right. Yeah. No, great to be here.
What time is it where you are right now?
We just hit 7 p.m. So Yeah,
Okay.
you're starting your day, and I'm coming to the end of mine. So,
Well, it just depends on perspective. I mean, it's 11 o'clock here in California, so I start my day pretty early. So I'm like ready for a nap at this point. So listen, Richard, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I was wondering, just as a way to start, because we'll get into more about what you do and your area of expertise when it comes to sales and sales strategy. I was curious if you remembered where you and I first met, because I do.
it was a SaaS conference in 2017, I believe. Yeah,
Good.
my memory's good. And how could I forget the conversation we had, Scott? So I'm pleased that you remember it too.
Oh, spoken like a true salesperson. Now I feel like, should I put you on the spot and ask you if you remember the conversation?
Maybe not. My memory gets a bit patchy at that front, but the very fact I remember that's where we met is a good starting point.
No, that was cool, man. Because I do remember you guys had a demo. I don't know what they called them there at the event then, if it was a booth or a table or whatever it was. And I was seeing what you and your company do, and I was immediately interested and intrigued as to what you did, which is what got me to come over and talk to you. So why don't we kick things off officially by introducing you, Richard Smith, and tell us, Richard Smith, when people ask you what do you do and what does your company Refract do, what problem do you solve, how do you describe that for folks?
Yeah, I kind of answer that in two ways. I think what I do personally is I feel like I help salespeople, get better at what they do, which ties in nicely to what my company does, which is all around helping companies and helping salespeople have better sales conversations. I think it's a recognition that sales doesn't happen without having good quality conversations between seller and buyer. And actually, when you look at the landscape, there's a lot of salespeople aren't effective at having good quality conversations. It's not always an easy thing to have great sales conversations. They can be quite complex. Maybe sometimes maybe people try and complicate them to more than they need to be, but ultimately, my company Refract, we exist to help companies achieve better outcomes in their sales results by helping their salespeople have better conversations, helping frontline sales managers get deeper insights into the conversations that their salespeople are having, and really using our tools to coach their reps to betterment. So that's what we do.
And how exactly, without getting into too many details about the product, what exactly does the product do that enables the manager, salespeople, and coaches to improve sales conversations?
Sure. I think that the challenges historically is that so many managers are actually blind to what their salespeople actually sound like when they're speaking with their customers. Either they don't have the time to sit and listen live, or their salespeople are locking themselves away in a meeting room behind closed doors, and those conversations are never ever heard beyond those walls. And so that the first key is actually just exposing what those conversations sound like. So we have the ability to either record or capture recordings from other systems of those conversations, whether they're a salesperson making a cold call or whether it's someone doing a discovery or a demo. And our technology then will analyze that conversation, transcribing it, identifying keywords, patterns in the conversation, how much the salesperson was talking versus who they were talking to, things that they weren't saying on the call, which they should have been saying, and then using that kind of artificial intelligence to surface those insights and alert managers to, first of all, the conversations that they should be paying most attention to based on what's actually happening in those conversations, but then also taking people to the specific key moments of those conversations to save time from just listening to hours upon hours of call time. Take me to the moments where this happened. So yeah, it's all around analyzing that conversation and then using AI to really help guide individuals to the right conversations, the right moments of conversations.
Yeah, that's the thing that was most intriguing to me when I first came across what you guys do, because I've been a sales manager, I've been a COO of a company, run teams, and even with our clients in our coaching program, a lot of times we get asked, hey, can you listen to this call and see how I did? And it's just freaking time consuming, whether I'm listening to a recording, because then it's not just listening to the recording, it's like, okay, now I have to analyze it. Now I have to type in my notes. Now I have to share that information and communicate. Then the rep has to listen or read my notes. And then we have to talk about what I said and why I think, and if there's a disagreement or how can we improve. It's just like a 30-minute call is 5 hours of work.
Yeah.
And the problem is the precision that's required in some of these sales conversations, especially as a startup. You're trying to communicate and educate your customers, not just about the product, but how you solve the problem in such a unique way that nobody else has solved it. There's just like so many layers of communication where there's a chance for attenuation in the message that by the time it gets from the product person to the sales manager, to the sales rep, to the customer who then has to tell it to their peers, it's just like, there's no way that the message is getting through the way it needs to get through.
Yeah. And I think the real key message there is that there is so much value in listening to sales conversations. I think, and you've kind of hinted there that the actual benefits and the insights into those conversations is powerful, not just for sales managers, but also across the business, even to marketing teams. Like, what are the key things that keep on coming up in our sales calls? What competitors get mentioned more times than others in our conversations? For product teams, what are the features or the integrations that we get asked for more than anything else? The problem is that all of that information is locked typically in sales conversations, and the people who are most aware of them are salespeople having those calls, but they're not necessarily the most proactive feeding that information back. So there's all this data in these conversations, massively valuable data, but the challenge is identifying where that exists in the call. And people, you're right, Scott. People don't want to sit there, and they don't have the time to sit there and listen to hours of call time. They just want to find that out really quickly and be taken to those moments and calls. And that's exactly where we're coming to help.
Yeah, I was imagining myself remembering as a sales rep how I would ask for features and integrations, and let's be honest with myself. There was definitely some bias there. Like, I'd go running to the product team or the engineering team. I'm like, oh, look, we really got to have this integration. Everybody's asking about it. Everyone means like 2 deals in the pipeline that if I don't get these 2 deals, I'm not going to make my number this quarter. So versus, okay, yeah, 2 people asked about it. What about the other 20 who asked about these other integrations? Or did they really ask about it? Or did you hear that, but that's not really what they said? So there's all kinds of downstream effects to what you guys are doing there too. So, well, let's dig in. And so I'll just start at a high level, and then we'll parse out the details. What, in your experience, makes for a great sales conversation? Are there like 3 pillars or like a certain checklist that if you go, hey, if you check these boxes, then you've had a great sales conversation?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, if I had to answer in a nutshell what a great sales conversation is, it's actually, first of all, both parties involved in that conversation feeling like it was a meaningful interaction come the end of it. And having a great sales conversation doesn't have to be that at the end of that conversation that there is an opportunity for a sale. I think people and salespeople are maybe tuned to think that every single conversation that they have, every single lead, every single opportunity, they have to somehow find a positive outcome at the end of that conversation. And we all know that's just not the case in the real world. Far more people will not buy from us than buy from us. But key is in that conversation is figuring that out as quick as possible, being comfortable that from the outset, from the very start of that conversation, and being very open with our prospects to say, you know what, at the end of this 20-minute, 30-minute, 40-minute long conversation, an outcome could well be that we identify that we can't really help you, and that's fine, and we figure that out, and we part ways as friends, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that outcome as a salesperson, just so you know. And by being able to have a great sales conversation which results in identifying that is never going to be an opportunity worth pursuing, then we've saved ourselves, from falling down the pitfall that so many salespeople fall down, which is having a bloated pipeline of opportunities that will never ever close, that their prospects are too scared to say no or will never say no to, and they spend half their time chasing basically dead ends. So I think it's about getting to the end of that conversation, figuring out there was a meaningful conversation, and whether that's a positive outcome or an outcome that was, in the sense of, yep, we've identified that you can help us, or equally, actually, we figured out that you can't help us, and that's perfectly fine, and we can move on. And I think, if I had to kind of summarize it in a nutshell, without going into the detail, that's kind of where I'd start.
Okay. I definitely want to dig more into the idea of chasing dead ends in a couple minutes. When you say meaningful, you use that word. I don't know if that was a specific word choice around meaningful. How do you look at a conversation and just like if it's binary, you go, yes, it was meaningful or no, it wasn't?
Yeah.
What does meaningful mean?
Great question. I would say that it's predominantly that the customer has came away from it feeling like it was a positive experience, because I think one of the big problems that we see with our technology and the customers that we work with is too many salespeople are seeing a conversation as a way just to pitch at prospects. They get a prospect on the line, they've got 20 minutes set aside, or they've got a demo scheduled in for 45 minutes. They'll ask one or two questions at the start of the call, and they're just too excited and too keen just to jump right in and showing their wonderful product and talking about their business and all the wonderful features that they've got in their platform, and going end to end through every single menu and look at how great this is, and this is what I think is really useful. And the prospect is just feeling like they're not being listened to, that they're just being literally pitched at. It's not a conversation. It is typically a one-way dialogue, and so many salespeople fall down this trap, and they're just a lot of the time they're not aware that that it's turned out that way. So I think for me, meaningful is first of all making sure it's a conversation and not just a one-way dialogue. But key to any great sales conversation, and if I just focus maybe on like the discovery part of the sales process specifically, I'm a strong believer that sales are won or lost in that discovery phase before you've even shown anybody a product. And I believe that when I'm selling to somebody, that I got to the stage now where I'm pretty confident that at the end of that discovery conversation, I know whether that customer is going to buy or not before I've even shown them my product. And great discovery it's about coming back to the meaningful conversation. Is about asking great questions. It's about asking questions that helps prospects maybe see problems that they weren't aware of, or see problems from a different angle, giving them insights, helping prospects learn about things that they perhaps didn't know before. And is also really key is making sure that conversation has the appearance of a doctor-patient relationship rather than a salesperson and a prospect relationship. And hopefully a lot of the listeners have heard of Mark Roberge, former CRO of HubSpot, wrote the Sales Acceleration Formula, and he described this concept, and I'm so bought into it, of great conversations, meaningful conversations should look less like a salesperson, a prospect talking. It should look more like a doctor talking to a patient, in the sense of the doctor is seen as the trusted advisor. They're seen as they're a diagnoser. They ask great questions. They're prescriptive, and the patient listens to what the doctor says and trusts in them and believes them, and doesn't fight back or doesn't argue back. And I think once you start getting in that mind frame of meaningful conversation should look like a doctor kind of working with a patient, diagnosing and helping them and prescribing, then your conversations will suddenly start looking and sounding very differently to what they did perhaps before.
Yeah, the trust factor that you mentioned, that's something that came up in a recent episode. We had a guest, David JP Fisher, who does a lot of work on LinkedIn and social selling and building trust. And he talked about this importance of creating a conversation that's built on trust, not just me pitching and you being forced to listen come hell or high water. And I'm curious about, and if you have the data, or if you looked at some of the data in your own platform, are there certain signals that, like if you were looking at, a big data set of lots of conversations, are there certain signals that as a salesperson or as a manager evaluating a salesperson's conversation that would indicate, okay, this is a conversation where trust is established, or this is a conversation where trust is not established? Like what are the signals that would indicate to a salesperson that they've got the trust that would enable that doctor-patient relationship?
Yeah, and it needs to be kind of answered on a couple of different levels, because a lot of the data that technologies like Refract generate is just kind of leading indicators. It doesn't necessarily always give the context. And I'm still a big believer that in order to get the true context, you have to listen to how things are being said and when they were being said in the conversation versus just, here's some data that we've pulled out. But some of the things that we typically look at is, first of all, being able to truly see at a glance, what was the balance of conversation like in this call? I kind of saw recently one of my new sales reps, and they'd had a call with a prospect, and I literally came and saw that they'd been talking for 90% of the time on the call. I didn't even need to listen to the call in that situation to think, okay, this is a one-way dialogue. I mean, that the prospect has said, in the space of 30 minutes, has probably been talking for, in total, maybe 2 minutes worth of this conversation. You can't truly build trust with a prospect when it's been a one-way conversation in that vein. That the prospect will come off that and feel like they haven't been truly listened to. So I think that's a good indicator. Where we go beyond that is looking at the amount of backwards and forwards in the conversation. So we kind of look at this as like engagement of how many times did the conversation truly switch backwards and forwards in the conversation? Was there a high number of switches, which indicates there was a high level of dialogue? There was dialogue from going, from both sides, both parties. The prospect was probably asking lots of questions, and we go a step beyond that by saying, okay, of those switches, how many were really short switches versus more longer, expansive switches where the prospect's opening up, they're giving more dialogue, they're being less closed, in which case that would indicate that the salesperson's getting more trust because the prospect is being more forthcoming with the answers that they're giving and more in depth. So that's some of the kind of the leading indicators that we that we've seen. I think above and beyond that, a lot of it just comes into truly listening to how prospects sound when they respond to the salesperson. Again, this does take the actual listening back to the conversation. Does the prospect sound cold on the call? Are they quite sharp with their answers? Do they sound like they're unenthused? In which case, I think it's an indicator that they really haven't been. They feel like they're not having a meaningful conversation. But yeah, that's kind of some of the main things that we typically see in being able to use data and to identify where trust is or isn't being built.
Yeah, so I wrote down the three things: balance of conversation. So how much are they saying versus what we're saying, and then the frequency of you called it switching. So yeah. I'm talking, then you're talking. I'm talking, you're talking. Are they short switches versus long switches? So if I might ask a question that's, I don't know, a 15-word sentence. If I'm getting back a 10-sentence response, and then I ask another question, that's what you consider a long switch. So that prospect, I've asked one question and they've given me apparently a lot of detail because they've spent 10 times the number of words that I've spent asking the question.
Yeah, that's right.
Second one.
That's right. But I'd say, like, for me, the ultimate indicator of trust is when prospects get comfortable answering tough questions. And tough questions, I'd say the majority of salespeople out there are quite too scared of asking the tough questions. And the tough questions are ultimately the ones that get the prospect to get emotional. When prospects get emotional, it's emotions which typically drive people to making decisions, to buying. And it's when you hear prospects, in our case, we're literally selling to VPs of sales. And it's when we're getting prospects to the stage where they're openly sharing with us, the performance of their team, who their top performers are, what their top performers do differently to the middle. What does it mean if that VP of sales can't change performance by a certain length of time? When you're getting those kind of responses back, that you've built trust, but you can't get there on, in the first 5 minutes of the conversation. If I started a sales call with somebody and was asking those tough questions off the bat, I haven't earned the credibility and the right to earn those questions. And so we have to, it's a bit of a journey to get to that place, but ultimately people will become more, will share more with you and have more trust when we ask great questions and share insights and demonstrate our credibility as a salesperson. Once we do that, people are more forthcoming with the answers to those tough questions.
Yeah, I really love this. The emotional piece, obviously, I mean, that's a key part. And I also, I mean, I think on myself, I've been guilty of being too scared to ask hard questions. And I think part of that, like the signaling, the third, so we talked about the balance of conversation, the switching, and then you mentioned enthusiasm. So if I'm hearing enthusiasm versus a very monotone reply, if I'm hearing enthusiasm, that's a signal to me like, okay, this person might be more willing to open up. And if I'm hearing monotone, then I got some work to do to figure out why this person's being monotone. And even just sensing that enthusiasm, that should, in a sense, like I'm feeling like, okay, if I'm looking for permission to ask a hard question, if I hear enthusiasm, that should be all the permission that I should need to maybe take a step out on the ledge. I don't have to go jumping off a cliff when it comes to asking a tough emotional question, but maybe I can sort of like take the first step and see if I lob a more emotional question out to someone about like, geez, like it sounds like team performance is really suffering right now. We're already, 2 weeks into 2020. And things keep going that way. Well, it sounds like you could miss your quota for Q1. What would that mean for you?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden they're like, man, like, well, we already missed last year. If I don't hit my quota first quarter this year, like we could be really in trouble here.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, okay, now I got them. And I mean that in a positive way, not like, oh, I hooked them on the line, but I've gotten to the place where I want to go, which is a real human to human conversation here.
Yeah, maybe one little kind of tip for the listeners as well, who are maybe kind of a little bit nervous about asking those tough questions. Maybe they sense that their prospects are ready to give them answers, but they're basically scared of pissing the prospects off. It's called need for approval. It's basically one of the biggest weaknesses that salespeople have, and as a sales competency is need for approval. It's being afraid of basically it's the need to be liked by their prospects, and therefore the desire not to annoy their prospects, and they feel that by asking tough questions that runs the risk of them annoying their prospects. One of the tips I was going to share that we use here at Refract is actually asking permission to ask the tough question, because it's amazing. It's like in your personal life, if someone says, can I ask you a tough question? When you get asked that question, what you do is you never ever say, no, don't ask me the tough question, but you sort of brace yourself for the tough question. You prepare yourself as the person receiving that question. And then once you've kind of taken a deep breath and prepared yourself, you then say, yes, go on then. As a salesperson, when you've asked for permission to ask the tough question, you've earned the right by actually asking the prospect, listen, I'm going to give you the option to say no here, to say you're not ready for this. But once the prospect buys into that and you ask the tough question, it's amazing how often they will give you the tough answer. And we've used this so many times, and it's amazing how often it works, because one, people don't really want to say no. Two, you prepare themselves for the tough questions, so they're kind of, they're almost ready to give the answer rather than you just asking it off the bat. But also you get permission. Once you've got permission, then you can go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. And it's really a basic human interaction, right? I mean, I think about conversations with my wife, conversations with my son, conversations with friends, right? You're like, okay, I got to bring up a topic that's really bothering me. And what's if I just come out of the blue in the middle of dinner and say, whatever that question is, like, this thing you're doing is really bothering me, or whatever it is, right? Then the other person's immediately going to get defensive, right? And so what do? Like, as humans with other friends and other people we interact with, say, listen, I got to bring something up. It's really bothering me. Is it okay we talk about it right now? Because I'd really love to get it off my mind. If you're talking to a friend that did something to you that, they didn't show up for a movie. They said, hey, you're going to meet me for a movie at 9:30, and you didn't show up. You didn't text nothing. And then 2 weeks later, we're out having a beer, and you didn't, like, listen, man, I gotta bring this up. It's really bothering me. Do you mind if I ask you about this? Then they're going to be like, okay, yeah. It's almost, and when I think about sales, I always think of it as opening doors, right? You can't push people into buying stuff. You can't really convince them. You can open doors and let them walk through. And so by this technique you're describing here, Richard, it's almost like I'm gonna slightly push the door open ajar so you get a peek of what's there, and then it's a little bit less scary than just trying to barge through that door. And I think it's just the human reaction to sort of like disarm people and warm them up for what's coming. You use the word brace, and I like that because it's like, okay, now we're clear as to what's happening next. I'm good. But if I don't know what's happening next and you just throw this question on me and I'm not ready for it, now it feels like you're trying to like, oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Exactly, Scott. And I think with sales, we should always be looking to lower resistance is the key objective. And if you can keep lowering resistance in different ways, you're going to build more trust. People are going to be more open with you, and you can very quickly increase that resistance so much quicker than you can have it lowered in sales by just saying the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong tone. So yeah, I'm a big believer of that. And I think the other word that you used as well was about use the word human. I think this is so like, we can often forget this when we think about sales and conversations, is that sometimes people just forget that the humanization aspect of a conversation. Just because it's a sales conversation, we suddenly think we have to be turn into a different person and talk in a different way, and ask really weird, clever questions that took us 15 minutes to prepare before the call, rather than just have it as like a human interaction. And I think this is why we talk about like scripts. I'm quite like a little bit on the fence about scripts, if I'm honest. I think scripts can be really useful in certain types of interactions. I think scripts are good kind of frameworks and guides, but I think the risk is when we use scripts for conversations, we run the risk of losing that humanization aspect of the conversation between two people. And so yeah, I think that the word human there that you mentioned just really stuck out to me as something that I think is so key, and that so many people just kind of can forget about when they're having sales interactions with prospects.
Well, and I think just the general state of sales, when we look at all of the tools, all the automations, all of the systems, all of the segmentation of roles and responsibilities from marketing to SDR to AE to sales engineer, all of that stuff, like all of that process, I think has trained us inappropriately to forget how to just have that human interaction. And so, whether it's an SDR, you're trying to train an SDR to ask good questions. And then you sit down and you look at the SDR's work and you're like, well, I'm just sending out these template emails via Sales Loft or Outreach or whatever. And like, that's my job. I'm like, no, that's not your job. That's a tool to help you do your job. Your job is to create conversations and ask people questions and see who might be interested in learning more. And I think just by the world of technology and AI and platforms and software, it's easy to just lose that touch of, hey, there's a dude on the other person on the other side, or there's a woman on the other side of the phone that just may not be having a good day.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Let's just have a conversation.
Yeah. I think you kind of touched upon there something that I just feel like it's worth talking about as well is when you think about, one of the things I coach my reps to do is to ask effective questions, but two, to sound human. Is the most effective questions to ask prospects are actually the most simplest ones. And I think too often I get asked by people, and people message me on LinkedIn saying, "Hi, Rich, what can you think of some questions that I could ask as part of my discovery calls?" Or what I'm trying to think of great questions to ask, and people are trying to think that they need to create these like magical kind of long-winded intelligent questions which will kind of sneak the prospects into giving a certain answer. You don't need to do that. And I think the best questions, the ones that make you sound most human, are the ones that are literally just asking the prospect to talk more and to share more and open more. I go through this process with my own salespeople as saying, if you're in a sales conversation, the prospect says something like, that's been a challenge recently for us, is rather than think of an intelligent question to ask following that, is just say, you said it's a challenge. Can you share more about what you're experiencing there? Or tell me more about that. And when you just ask those simple questions of just getting prospects to share more, tell me a little bit more. Can you expand on that? It's amazing what more you learn. Prospects will go again. They'll tell you 2 or 3x the information they gave you beforehand. You'll learn more, and also you're not sounding like you're asking them tricky, magical questions. You're just getting them to talk more. And if you can get in the habit as a salesperson of just asking your prospects to share more, can you expand on that? I didn't understand what you meant there. Can you reframe that? It's amazing how willing prospects are just to give you more information, share more, and at the same time, you just sound human. You just sound curious that you're just trying to find a bit more information out.
You brought me back to a question I learned. I'm going to date myself because I used to listen to audio tapes, cassette tapes in the car to a guy named Brian Tracy. So Brian Tracy was a sales trainer, very popular in the 80s and 90s. He's still out doing talks now. And he's got a number of different programs. One of them is called The Psychology of Sales. I think it was The Psychology of Selling. And the question that I learned from that tape is, how do you mean? So when somebody says, hey, it's been really a challenge for us recently, and you just reflect back what they said, you're like, oh, you said it's a challenge recently. How do you mean? And it's a different version of what you just shared, which is to tell me more about that. Or another version of this, which I've heard, is how so? You said it's been a challenge recently. How so? And these are all just designed to, it's not probing for additional information. It's probing for more information about what they've already shared, which is, I think, just to categorize. We're not looking for yet another data point. We're trying to learn more about the one data point they just shared.
And in all the times that you've asked that question, Scott, have you ever had a situation where prospects said, no, I'm not going to tell you more. I've just given you the answer. My experience is that prospects just will openly say, oh yeah, I'm happy to tell you more. I think one, because they actually like the fact that you sound curious as a salesperson. You're not thinking about the next question you've got on your sheet and it's all down to your agenda. It's amazing. I've never had a situation where prospects have said, no, I've just given you the answer, Richard. That's the answer. They will openly just tell you more and share more and expand more. And you probably end up learning about their pains and problems and probably why they're going to buy from you just by asking those questions.
And the other piece to that, I totally agree with what you just said. I often, and I'm doing sales for 25 years, and I don't know why I'm still surprised by this. When somebody says to me, we've been having a lot of challenges around this recently, I immediately, of course, will have in my mind what those challenges are. I'm like, oh, I bet you this is this, and this is what they mean by challenges. And then if I do what I should do by asking that question, oh, so how do you mean? Or could you tell me more about that? You said you had some challenges recently. Can you tell me more about that? What they share is almost never what I thought their challenges were. They tell me something totally different than what I thought it was going to be. And I'm like, that's almost the validation that I needed to ask that question. Because I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I asked that question, because I would have gone with a totally wrong assumption of what they meant by challenges. And now they told me exactly what the challenges are. And so we can direct the conversation around how whatever we do can help them address those specific challenges that are different than what I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a kind of sales 101 is just never make assumptions. Even if you think and you're well informed what the answer might be, it's never true until it comes out the prospect's mouth. And that is why asking prospects to expand more, share more, is absolutely key. Otherwise, it's amazing how in my career, when I've sat down with a salesperson or seen managers speak with salespeople, and then they'll say, also, how did that call go that you just came off? Oh yeah, it was great. I mean, it's always great. And then the next question is also, what are you like? What are the compelling reasons that they're going to buy from us? Say, oh, well, yeah, I think what they've got is they start the word with I think. And as soon as they start the sentence with I think, it's big alarms, red flags. They're in a space where they're just making assumptions, and it's a dangerous place to be in. And that's why you should never, as a salesperson, feel like you're asking your prospect too many questions, as long as they're well-informed questions, and you just genuinely sound like you're just seeking to understand a bit more because you want to be helpful. Prospects, it's like coming back to this human element. Nobody wants when you're at the bar or in the pub or you're out or you're in work, the people that you want to, the people who are genuinely curious about you, who will ask you a question about, how was your weekend? And you say, oh yeah, it was good. Oh, so what did you get up to? and that they ask those questions and they're genuinely curious. They're not just asking you questions for the sake of it. And they're the people that you have more respect for because they're genuinely interested in you, because they ask more questions and they seek to understand and they're curious, rather than the person who just asks you one question and moves on to the next thing on their agenda. It's, the correlations between just human interactions and sales interactions are just very similar, because you're essentially still talking to a human being at the end of the day.
I love this tip about if I'm a manager and I ask a rep, I'm doing a pipeline review, how do you know they're ready to buy? If it starts with, if I hear I think, we're just like, time out.
Yeah.
Why do you think? And we hear this with our clients all the time. They'll join a coaching call and they're like, okay, I've got this big deal with so-and-so company and I got to figure out how to get this thing converted. And I'll say, well, I'll ask a similar question. I'll act as the sales manager and say, look, how do you know they're ready to take action? Well, I think that, and I'm like, okay, well, why do you think that? And they're like, well, I think that because it's okay. Have you verified that with the customer? Have you asked them? Well, I haven't asked them, but whenever we work with other customers, I'm like, look, this is your opportunity in the sale to go back to that prospect and have another conversation. Say, listen, I was going through notes of our previous calls. I realized that, I've been making some assumptions about why you might be interested. This is what I'm thinking. Is this correct? Or is there another reason? And they're like, well, yeah, those things are important, but the real reason that we might want to take action is because of this. And you're like, oh, crap. So it's recoverable, but it's okay if you're like in a one-on-one, you can do one deal at a time. But if you're managing sales teams and managers, and like you're a manager managing a big team, you've got to train the reps to do this on their own. You can't fix every opportunity.
And it's kind of like, it's one of the reasons why I've always said, like, the CRM is often traditionally being classified as like the source of truth. And I kind of call bullshit on that, because the CRM is only as accurate as the stuff that, first of all, that the salesperson decides to put in the CRM. And oftentimes it's just down to their interpretation. And, if you're anything like salespeople I've worked with, the notes and summaries that they put into their CRM from a 1 hour conversation usually consolidated to about 3 sentences, and that 3 sentences does not provide a very accurate representation of the conversation that had. So that was hard. So yeah, but going back to your point, Scott, of like your recommendation to your clients to say, well, go back to the customer and seek clarification. I tell you what, the prospect who has the salesperson that comes back seeking clarification is going to earn so much more trust and credibility than the salesperson who doesn't, who just continues to speak with that prospect with loads of assumptions made. So, I think I really kind of back that, as far as, even if you feel like you didn't learn everything in that sales conversation, if you can reflect on, okay, I still feel like I don't truly understand that or truly know, you're going to get kudos and bonus points in your prospects by being seen as the attentive, diligent salesperson going back and seeking to understand after that conversation.
You also just reminded me this. Over Christmas, our in-laws were in town, and my father-in-law is sitting there at our countertop, and he's like, I got to get an oil change on the car. He's like, and it was like, I don't know, it was like December 28th or 27th or something. And I'm like, well, you just drove down from Idaho and you're deciding now you need to get an oil change on the car. I'm like, why didn't you just get it? I'm thinking to myself, like, why didn't you just do it before you left Idaho? And now you're like, want to get an oil change in the middle of California. So I said, all right, well, look, let me call our auto guy. It's Hoffman Automotive. Been going there for 10 years. I'm like, call him up. I'm like, hey, do you have room to put my father-in-law in for a oil change? I don't think we can do it today, maybe tomorrow. So let me talk to him and get back to you. So I get off the phone, and then it occurred to me, I'm like, why does he think he needs an oil change? So I said, Dad, I felt like a salesperson. I'm like, I'm just kind of curious that, like, why do you need, is there anything in particular, like, why do you need an oil change now? Like, instead of when you get back home? And he said, well, we just hit 5,000 miles and we got to get an oil change. He's got like a 2018 Subaru, brand new, pretty new car, all the computerized stuff. Now we have a Honda that we bought 7 years ago that's computerized that tells us when we need an oil change. And even at the dealership, when I bought the car, they're like, listen, just so you know, the whole 3,000, 5,000 mile oil change thing is over. The car will tell you when you need an oil change. We went like 12,000 miles, 15,000 miles before you need an oil change. And I explained all this to my dad. And he's like, I don't even know. Does the car have a computer? So my wife goes out to the manual in the car, gets the manual out, looks it up. Turns out and we turned on the car and we looked it up, and he's like, he's got like 70% oil life left.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I didn't even know. So we almost went down this wild goose chase of like finding a place that could get him an oil change. He's going to spend the money, spend the time instead of staying out at home. But just like asking the question, like, why do you think you need an oil change? Is because he was beholden to this old 3,000, 5,000 mile rule of like, 5,000 miles, you need an oil change. Like, not anymore.
Yeah. And that's just a great example of where asking great questions and just being curious. It wasn't a complex question to ask that you asked him.
Well, I was just being lazy. Let's be clear. I was being lazy. More than curious. But you're right. Yeah. It's just like, let's figure out why you think this thing. Because I don't want to like spend all day doing an oil change for your car. Like, I'm on vacation.
Yeah, you had more exciting things to be doing around the Christmas period. But no, it was, it's a great kind of just microcosm example of just asking a question just gets people to think of things a different way. And you probably in the process built up some great bonus points as well, of being seen as the diligent son-in-law too, Scott. So
well, that's just it, right? Talk about like a positive experience. Now I probably saved him hundreds of dollars over the life of his car because he won't be getting an oil change every 5,000 miles. He's like, wow, this is great. I didn't know that. So I get all the credit. So I want to change gears slightly because this has been huge. This is awesome, Richard. These are really great frameworks to use. One thing you mentioned much earlier in the conversation, I wanted to come around to, which is the concept of chasing dead ends or being unaware that we don't have a sales opportunity that we think we have, right? Salespeople, you want to be liked, need for approval, not just with customers, but with managers. We have numbers we want to hit. We have this confirmation bias that will, convince ourselves there's a deal here. But the challenge is if we can't self-diagnose that we're chasing a dead end, right? Because we're following this confirmation bias, we can spend months on a deal only to find out it's not a deal. So are there some, maybe a similar question to the signals question I asked earlier about, what are some signals of trust being built? What are some signals that for someone who wants to know, okay, I've got 20 deals in my pipeline that are all carried over from Q4. Which one of these are real? Which ones are dead ends? Are there certain metrics or signals or certain things I should be looking for to help me become more aware of these dead ends?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Scott. I think for me, it boils down to if there is no compelling reason for that person to buy, then there's a good chance that that's going to be a dead end deal. And I do this with my own sales team, and we do a pipeline review, and we look at an opportunity that we've got in their pipeline, and I kind of say, okay, tell me what's the compelling reason that this person's going to buy our product. And if they start with "I think," then I can see that as a bit of a red flag. If they give me a compelling reason which ultimately ends up being like a nice to have reason, that's not a compelling reason. Oftentimes just asking the salesperson, what is the compelling reason to buy for this prospect? What's the big challenge that they've got? And sometimes they might sit there and say, you know what, I don't actually think there is any. And just they hadn't actually stopped to think about it up until that point. I'd say whenever you get those kind of situations, there is a very, very high chance that deal is not gonna come in, and that might make people feel quite shocked listening to this, saying, oh, "Crap, that's like 80% of my opportunities that I've got in my pipeline right now. What about that's gonna suddenly make my pipeline look really, really slim. Give me the slim pipeline with great opportunities in over the bloated one, full of dead end opportunities any day of the week. Because this is, again, I come back, Scott, to this is just one of the big problems salespeople have is like hanging on to opportunities. Like, they just will never let go. It's like the the hot girl or guy at school that they thought they always had a chance with, and they just strung them along because they liked the attention, and they would just never let go and accept that they could never get that person. And I see it in sales. It's like people say, "Oh, I think that will come in. What's the next step that you've got with that prospect? Oh, well, we haven't really got one right now." And again, I'm like, "Well, you're out of control of that opportunity. Is that really an opportunity that you want to keep in your pipeline?" I think so that kind of ties me in feeling in control. I think in sales, if you don't feel in control of your sales opportunities, losing control kind of typically means that you lose that opportunity. And I think when you feel in control, you know what the compelling reasons to buy are, you know who the right stakeholders are, you know what the next step is. That next step is scheduled in. You understand their buying process. It's hard to describe the feeling, but when when you're in control of an opportunity. And again, that comes back to having that initial great discovery conversation. But yeah, I'd say all those facets of things that, one, as a manager, we can be asking those questions to figure out. But even as salespeople, we can just sometimes ask ourselves the question, have we identified truly a compelling reason why this person's going to part way with cash for my product or service? And if the answer is no, then there's a very, very good chance that person's never going to buy. We're best off, hitting close lost and finding people who do want to buy from us.
I was just imagining getting a sticky note or putting a sign in front of my desk that just says, is there a compelling reason? Yeah. Because I love that phrase, compelling reason. Not like, why are they going to buy? What problem is it? Like a compelling reason that, like, semantically, that makes a very good logical sense to me. Is there a compelling reason for them to want to buy, need to buy my thing? And then the second question is, am I in control? So like those two questions, I feel like if I had those in front of me during every sales conversation, is there a compelling reason? Am I in control? And if the answer is no to one or both, then I probably don't have a real opportunity. And to your point, like, yeah, okay, maybe you're going to have to shed some pipeline in the near term. Just use that as a learning opportunity to say, okay, well, what can we do? Let's go backwards and look at these deals, these 80% I thought were real that aren't. What can I do? How can I do a better job qualifying them in the beginning, qualifying them out, or finding that compelling reason? Maybe I missed a signal early on, and that's where a place I imagine your platform could be huge. I could go back and do a retro and say, okay, well, these ones aren't real. I don't have a compelling reason. I'm not in control. What did I do? What did I miss? That next time that comes up, I can make sure to look for it and really hone in on, okay, that's my opportunity to establish a compelling reason.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this ties into having a good sales process as well, and being able to early on, to have in your sales process, that a key part of that is figuring out, is there a compelling reason to buy? Not having that later on is like, try and figure that out early doors, because if you figure that out, that there is a compelling reason, that's great. If you figure out that there's not, then you can establish that really quickly. You can, don't spend any more time on it. And yeah, it's just, I think so many salespeople, they think that a hefty pipeline with X amount of weighted revenue attached to it, it's kind of like it's all kind of false eyelashes, really. It's stuff that makes sales leaders' jobs really difficult from a forecasting perspective, because they're literally going off this bloated pipeline, and it all looks brilliant because suddenly they've got X amount of thousands of dollars that are due to close this month, when in fact maybe most of those opportunities that they're never going to close. And this is why I kind of come back to, and this isn't a plug for Refract, but why I believe so much in the ability to listen to conversations, is when you listen to actually what those conversations sound like, you're moving away from just the salesperson's interpretation of a compelling reason, what they thought the prospect had problems or challenges with, to actually getting to the reality. Did the salesperson actually figure out if there was a compelling reason to buy? Or even as a salesperson, listening back to your own conversations to really sense check yourself and say, okay, I thought when I came off this call, this was a great conversation, but let's listen to it back and actually, test myself. Did I actually find something genuinely compelling in this conversation or not? It's amazing what you learn second time around when you listen back to yourself. you have a different opinion on things altogether because you just, your head's out of the game of the sales conversation to more just looking at it from the outside.
Yeah, and I think as reps, or if you're a CEO that's doing all the selling at a startup, I mean, buddy up. You can even buddy up with somebody. So listen, I'm going to listen to one of yours, you listen to one of mine. And that just maybe that one step removed, you get an objective viewpoint. And give them some guidance. Say, look, I'm looking for, is there a compelling reason? Am I in control? Did you look for, did you sense enthusiasm? Did I miss an opportunity to ask an emotional question? What did you notice in terms of the switches? I mean, you've just given us all the frameworks that if I wanted to just do a couple of these on my own with a buddy, it's just like, you just given us a scorecard of 5 or 6 things to look for. And it's sort of like, okay, it's like red, yellow, green. Like, nope, totally missed it. Yeah, kind of in the middle, green. Yeah, you nailed this one. You just do that on a couple of your own calls. Mm-hmm. I think that in itself, that awareness is you're gonna bump up the quality of your calls tremendously, in my opinion.
100%. And you're just gonna also be spending your time in the right places as well. You're going to be spending more time focused on driving the opportunities through where there is a good chance of them buying, and you're going to be, significantly reducing your wasted time just chasing in, checking in, asking for updates to prospects who are just, leading you to a dead end.
Yeah. Just checking in. How many of those emails are going out right now this week? Just checking in. Just checking in.
Well, it's been the Christmas break.
Back.
Yeah.
Circling back, checking in. How are we doing? Richard, dude, this has been epic stuff, man. I'm so glad we can make this happen. Glad to have met you a couple of years ago and get you on the show 3 years later. So for people that are interested in learning more about Refract, how you might be able to help them and their teams, what's the best way for them to learn more about Refract, and what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and your team?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can obviously go on our website, which is www.refract.ai. I'm pretty proactive on LinkedIn. I post a lot there about, conversations and my own experiences from good and bad conversations and sales coaching. So, if you're interested in kind of hearing what I've got to say, connect with me on LinkedIn and follow my posts. And yeah, happy to also just, anybody that's just wants a little bit of advice or just wants for me to share some insights or advice on what they're struggling with, just drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to respond. No strings attached.
Yeah, I'll say your posts on LinkedIn are what got me to reach out to you to get you on the show, because you are definitely a giver, and like all of your stuff is high quality. Everything is useful. I'm reading your stuff going, yep, that's right. And I'm getting some ahas on my own. So absolutely, for people listening, you should find Richard on LinkedIn, follow him, connect with him there, and definitely check out Refract.
Awesome. Appreciate it. All
right, folks, that's a wrap. That's my conversation with Richard Smith, co-founder and head of sales at Refract. I learned a ton in this conversation. I had a great time having that conversation with Richard. Listen for part 2, because at the end of this episode that we just recorded with Richard, he and I we kept the recording going, and we just started chatting a bit more about sales, and we ended up having another 15-minute conversation that added on to this podcast. So I'm going to treat that as a bonus episode that's going to be coming out, rather than just deluge you with even more information and more content in this one episode. I'm actually going to chop this up, put it into a bonus episode so you can listen to that separately on your own time. So look for that bonus episode coming out in the next week here on the Startup Selling Show. If you haven't already subscribed to the Startup Selling Show, absolutely, positively recommend that you do that. You can catch this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, lots of places where we are distributing out this content. We want to get the word out to as many people as possible. So please do subscribe. Nothing jazzes us more than seeing the episodes getting shared, getting listened to, subscriptions going up. It helps us keep motivated to keep bringing you some of this great content. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. We'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.